Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 495. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. Hey, everyone. I just want to let you know that I am super excited to announce coming January 2021, which is about, 3 weeks away, I'm going to be launching the Trauma Therapist newsletter. And this is a resource, an online monthly resource that will be delivered to your inbox and really geared towards therapists who are interested and passionate about learning about trauma. We'll include it in the newsletter. We'll be highlighting different modalities each month. So giving you the opportunity to compare and contrast different modalities and get informed. We'll be looking at different trauma programs in schools, see which ones are offering different certifications and so forth. I'll be talking with different trauma professionals, both seasoned and newer clinicians. We'll be highlighting different books, favorites of mine, and also ones that the Trauma Therapist 2.0 community are reading and recommending. We'll be listing different online conferences and events and summits, really a jam-packed resource to keep you up to date, informed, and inspired, which I love to do. So if you're interested, head on over to the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. You can jump on board right now and get a discount before it goes live January of 2021. Once again, the traumatherapistnewsletter.com, and I hope to see you there. All right, take care. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and super excited to have as my guest today, Samuel Moore-Sobel. Samuel, welcome, man.
Hey, thank you so much, Guy. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So do you prefer Sam or Samuel?
I prefer Samuel.
Okay. So Samuel is an author, speaker, and columnist. His debut memoir, Can You See My Scars, is the story of a harrowing encounter with sulfuric acid, trauma, and severe burns. His book is currently available for purchase through Mascot Books and on Amazon. Samuel writes about trauma, his experience as a burn survivor, and faith. He has a degree in government and international politics and currently lives with his wife in Northern Virginia. Our man, thanks for coming on here and sharing your story. First of all, are you calling from Virginia?
I am, yeah.
Okay. So let's dive in. What the heck is going on? How did all this start?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a complicated story, but I'll try to distill it to make it as clear as possible. It started on September 1st, 2009. So I was 15 years old. I was a week away from starting my sophomore year of high school. And I was hired for a day to move boxes and furniture for a man who lived just a few blocks from my parents' house. So a neighbor. And I was just trying to fit in one last odd job guy before the end of the summer. Just wanted to get a little bit more cash in the pocket before going back to school. And ended up there. I had a friend with me as well. And right from the get-go, things just didn't quite seem right. Like the details that we had talked about got changed. You know, it originally was we were taking stuff from his home into a storage facility. Then we get there and he's telling us, oh no, I have stuff at a storage facility. I want you to empty that. And then we're going to bring it back to the house. So, you know, I'm chalking it up to at the time, oh, maybe I just misunderstood him. I didn't understand what he was saying. But kind of throughout the day, there's a lot of these things that are just kind of off. So we end up going to the storage facility, emptying the facility that he had there, taking all this stuff, putting it on this U-Haul truck, bringing it back to his house. And we're emptying everything out of this truck. And at this point, my dad calls me. It's been a couple hours. It was supposed to go from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. The job's now way past that. We're like 2:30. And my dad says, you know, Samuel, I think it's time for you to come home. And I'm starting to feel a little nervous as well. My dad's talking to me. He's trying to get me to leave. And the guy's kind of overhearing this. I'm relaying this to him, and he says, "Oh, we just have one more stop. We're just taking everything 10 minutes down the road to his friend's house." So that seems to mollify my dad and makes me feel a little bit better. Okay, cool. Well, we end up in this truck. We're taking everything from, that he wants to take from his house to this person's shed, and it's 45 minutes away, and we pass county lines. And so, every kind of, bated breath here of like, what's going to happen next as we're going through. We end up in the middle of nowhere, literally. We had to take a U-turn on the highway just to get to this house. This house is in the middle of nowhere at the top of this hill. And there's this bottom of this hill where the shed is located. And so he's backing up the U-Haul truck. We get to the end of the bottom of the hill, and his friend is this woman who's there. She's got a couple dogs, and she opens the shed door, and it's just filled to the brim with stuff. It has boxes and furniture and just anything you can imagine is there. And so she says, "Okay, well, we've got to empty all this stuff." She says it's her ex-husband's stuff. It needs to all be emptied. There's a cement slab a few feet away, and she's asking us to take everything and throw it on there. So we're getting in the, kind of getting started. A box makes its way into my hands. She says, "Just toss it." And I look down, and it's got books and hay. And when I say hay, it's literally straw protruding from this box. There's nothing holding it together. There's no tape. It's wide open. And so I look down, I think, oh, that's kind of a weird assortment of items, but people keep all sorts of things in their shed. So, end up, like she said, toss it. So I toss it, and I'm 6'1", and I'm about, like I said, 5 to 10 feet away from this slab. And the second it hits that slab, there's an explosion. And I'm not sure what it is, right? But I see this substance come flying towards me, and instinctively I close my eyes, and it just hits me, and I feel like somebody's taken a match and just dropped it on me, or taken a lighter and dropped it on my face. I just feel like I'm completely on fire, and I'm not sure what's going to happen next.
Oh my God. So what happened?
So from there, we're there. I'm kind of writhing in pain. I kind of let out a yell. I'm feeling really, my body's going into shock. I can feel it, and the person who's with me convinces the man to call 911. 911's called. I get led up the hill, and then he drops the phone in my hands. I'm on the phone with 911. He goes back down the hill to try to figure out what the substance is, because they're asking him what is it on the phone, and he doesn't know. So I'm talking to them. They're trying to get me to just stay calm, telling me that I need water, and trying to urge other people to get water for me. But within probably about 8 to 10 minutes, it's pretty quick. The ambulance comes, and right before they do, I'm on the ground. I'm not unable to stand. I feel like my body's going into shock, and I'm wondering if this is the end. I'm thinking I'm going to die. This is the end of my life. And I'm kind of silently praying and trying to, pray to God that I make it through this. The ambulance shows up. They, pull out a stretcher. They put me on the stretcher. They pull the stretcher up. They're putting me in the ambulance. And I remember seeing all the trees that are just around this property. And I remember thinking, is this the last time I'm going to see trees? I'm in the ambulance. They're my eyes, they're trying to flush my eyes because they're thinking that something might have gotten in them. So they're just taking, just looks like something from like a sink, and literally just, dousing my eyes for the entire ride. We get to the hospital. I'm wheeled out of the ambulance and taken into the chemical shower. I'm stripped naked and thrown in the chemical shower, in there for quite a while as they're just trying to wash everything off of me. And then I end up getting wheeled to a room, and pretty quickly they're telling me that they're going to medevac me to Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., that they're just not prepared to be able to handle my case. So they're making preparations for that. They're telling me my mom's on her way. My parents are on their way. But I'm in this room, and I'll never forget, a nurse came in, and I'm talking to someone nearby, and someone asked me, "Oh, have you seen yourself yet?" And I say, "No." And before I can even, think, the nurse has thrown a mirror in my lap and said, "Here, why don't you take a look?" And so, no social worker, no psychologist, no nothing, kind of pick up this mirror. And I just remember seeing these large black, it just looked like somebody had taken my face and put it in mud. It just looked like these black stains, brown, just unrecognizable. I didn't recognize the image reflected back to me. And that was really devastating because I just, that's when it became real. Like, this is something really bad happened. Eventually we get on the medevac pretty quickly. My mom makes it just in time, says she loves me, says goodbye. She can't come with us because of the weight restrictions. I get wheeled out to the medevac, on the medevac. Have this a tour of DC. There's a beautiful scene of the Washington Monument out there, which the paramedic wakes me up to see as I'm on the helicopter ride. But anyway, end up landing and get to Children's Hospital. And the first thing I remember, I'm kind of asleep in the room, and the first thing I remember is a family friend arriving and just tears in his eyes. And then his wife comes in, pulls him out of the room so that I don't, see that. My dad arrives soon after, same scene, tears in his eyes. And now I'm wondering, do I look even worse than I did a few hours ago? I'm wondering if it's even worse. So I'm asking my family friend, how do I look? How do I look? And she keeps just telling me, she's grabbing my hand and she keeps saying, I'm looking on the inside, not the outside, through tears in her eyes. And so it just unbelievable, just unbelievable. I'm like, oh, what does that mean? So
right. That's nice, but maybe it means what you don't want it to mean. Samuel, let me just jump in here for a second. This is harrowing. So it was sulfuric acid?
Yeah, so we find out later that it apparently was sulfuric acid. So the authority, and I don't remember, it somehow gets relayed to us. I think it's by the doctors. The authorities ask the woman what the substance was. And she said that her ex-husband was a sculptor and he used the acid for metal etching. And so apparently it was this glass jar at the bottom of the box. And the doctor said it should have hit my legs, but because it was charged, because it was exposed to the elements and it was sitting in the shed, that it came flying towards my face. And that's why I got the damage there. So they say it was labeled with like a piece of tape, and it said sulfuric acid 1%. Right. The doctors estimated it was much higher than that, because if it was 1%, it wouldn't have burned me. But they don't know. They never ended up she never handed it over for them to even test. So it's hard to know kind of what the substance was.
And just remind, how old were you when this happened? I
was 15.
15.
Yeah.
So what kind of injuries did you sustain ultimately?
Yeah, so I ended up sustaining second and third degree burns to my face and also my arms. There's a few on my arms as well. And at the time, I had actually a lot of scarring around a lot of burns around my ear. Miraculously, that actually is undetectable today. But those were kind of the areas that sustained it. Then when I was in the hospital, they tried to do a dermabrasion, which was a surgery where they're just scraping off everything that they can. And they were able to do that on one side of the face, the other side not as well. But within 24 hours, they sent me home and they said, there's nothing else we can do for you. The rest was up to me. And I had to kind of, find my way emotionally, physically, spiritually through this quagmire of events that had changed my life in an instant.
Oh my God. So did you get surgery done?
I did.
Plastic surgery done? Okay.
Yeah. So I've had more than a dozen plastic surgeries. I had laser surgeries as well. So they would come in and they would, take a laser to those areas to try to even them out a little bit, help the density of them, take away some of the redness. Did a bunch of those. Those are especially painful because they don't put you under for those. So it feels almost kind of like what I would imagine electrocution in some ways is. It's kind of like zapping those areas as you're in the doctor's office. But yeah, I had a number of operations. They at one point took a skin graft from my ear to put it under my nose. That actually didn't take. They had another doctor had to go in and redo that, take that graft away, and create a new scar, which is the one under my lip here. But yeah, had a ton of work done. And I mean, a lot of people tell me now when I speak to audiences and groups that I look, they can't quite see them, that I look really good. A lot of my most recent doctor told me, you look like you got in a really bad bike accident. You don't look like, you had a really good outcome. That they say most people who have these kind of injuries, actually, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder for them to heal, and that I've healed really well considering. So it's a miraculous healing process, but I'm grateful to have the face I have today. Like I said, it's so uncomfortable. I mean, I still have them, especially in the heat. It can bother me a bit. It can kind of itch. It can, I have to be careful when I shave, but it does. My face looks a lot better than it did 10 years ago.
So how have you dealt with this? I mean, what was it like to go through this experience? How has it impacted you?
Yeah, especially in the wake of it, right? There a lot of the immediate factors were, so I didn't go back to school. I was on homebound tutoring for months. When I did go back to school, I was kind of going back part-time. Eventually, it wasn't until May of the next year, or near the end of the year, that I was going back full-time. So, the immediate effect of that was I felt almost like a pariah, right? I felt like a lot of my friends had kind of drifted away. I never really experienced bullying for how I looked, but they definitely kind of drifted. And I felt really alone in it. I mean, I felt really alone in the suffering of what had happened. I was trying to process what had happened, and not only the physical scars, but the emotional scars. A few months after the accident happened, I was diagnosed with symptoms of PTSD and depression. So a major way that I was able to kind of work through this experience was going to years of counseling. Had a really great psychiatrist. I talk a lot about our sessions in my book, but he was really helped me kind of develop the tools. He always mentioned kind of the toolbox, the theoretical toolbox of tools that you can revisit when you're experiencing symptoms of PTSD and depression, and what those tools were. So, it was the counseling sessions. I went on medication for a time as well. So I was on medication, but really just kind of developing that reservoir of tools to be able to kind of combat those feelings and those waves of depression that would come and go. Also did EMDR treatment for a bit as well, which helped kind of lessen the PTSD symptoms and kind of make sense of kind of providing some of that distance from the experience so that I could deal with the emotions instead of getting caught up in the symptoms of the PTSD that I was experiencing. So really spent a lot of time in counseling, and it really helped.
What were, if you don't mind me asking, some of the symptoms that you were experiencing?
Yeah. So a lot of the experiences, I was having irritability. I was having a lot of insomnia. I was unable to sleep for days on end at times. Or I'd get a few hours in, but I'd spend most of the night lying awake trying to fall asleep. Some of the other symptoms, I had flashbacks. Re-experiencing the event. Any little thing would trigger it. I remember being in the shower just a month after the accident, and turning on the water, and some of the heat from the water really bringing back that experience of getting burned, and kind of having a flashback and having to, get out of the shower because it was so overwhelming. So that was where I think the main, a lot of anger as well, flashes of anger, just, some of the depression was, unable to get out of bed or feeling really exhausted all the time, just really having trouble getting through those daily activities, having trouble paying attention, focusing in class. Those were kind of the symptoms that I was experiencing at the time.
Just some of those guys.
That's right. Just a few.
So, I mean, it just seems like you were so lucky it didn't impact your sight, your eyes, right?
Yeah. And, the doctor said that one of the day after, so we're in the hospital, and the ophthalmologist was inspecting my eyes, and she told my parents that her quote was, "I don't have an explanation for you as to why he can see based on the condition of his eyelids." My eyelids were burned so badly. And in fact, I remember being able, even my eyebrow, being able to kind of, it was almost half of it was almost burned off my face. I was able to kind of push it back and forth because it was off my face. So based on the condition of my eyelids and that whole area, she had no explanation for that. Another thing that they said as well, they were checking me in the hospital for any damage to my organs, because one drop of sulfuric acid, you swallow it and it can burn through your esophagus, it can burn through your any of your liver, kidney, any of those internal organs. And so they were trying to figure out, do we need an organ transplant here? What are we working with? And so they were amazed by all the medical staff, didn't have an explanation for what had happened, and they were amazed by it.
So you look great.
Thank you.
Granted, we're on Zoom, but I can see one scar on the side of your face. But having said that, does that mean anything to you? Or are you like, you know what? I'm sick of hearing that. This was my experience. This is actually what I've gone through. I've gone through all these surgeries and I feel, X or Y. What are your thoughts on that? What's your response to that?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? It's because on the one hand, it feels good to hear that, right? To hear, hey, you look really great. That you're, considering all the things that happened to you, life's turned out well, right? It could have been so different, and I feel so blessed in that. And then on the other hand, there is a little bit of, and it depends on how people say it, right? So I talk a little bit about the book that there was people I've encountered who said that, and I felt like it wasn't it was meant in a way to kind of take away from the experience. It was kind of
Right.
like, oh, nothing happened.
Right.
Why are you upset about this? This shouldn't, you look great. Why are you upset? Right. And so there's a little bit of that kind of, one of the things I try to tell people and educate people on, because I don't think everybody understands that there's also that it's not just about the appearance, right? It's about how it feels on my face. It's about how it feels internally. It's about how this accident experience affected how I viewed myself.
Well, let me stop you right there. How has it and does it impact how you feel about yourself?
Yeah. So, one of the things that was, especially in the beginning, I remember being the first night, literally lying awake in the hospital thinking, is any girl ever going to fall in love with me? Right. That was one of my first thoughts was, is anybody ever going to want to be with me? And so I struggled through adolescence and young adulthood with, is anybody ever going to want to date me? Is anybody ever going to want to love me? And that feeling led to a lot of experiences that, it led me to get into relationships that weren't healthy, but I stuck around in what you could argue emotionally abusive relationships at times because I thought I'm not going to get anybody better. I'm not going to get anybody else. So it affected how I viewed myself and my own ability to attract a romantic partner. I definitely had to struggle with a lot of, I struggled a lot with my body image. I struggled a lot with, in the wake of the accident. So I wasn't able to really exercise. I had to be careful about going out in the sun. So all those things happened. And then, I'm not exercising as much and I put on a lot of weight and then I'm going on medication and sometimes that can be a side effect as well. And so I put on a lot of weight. And so I remember, feeling really bad about my body because of how I, was putting on all this weight. And in some ways I felt like I didn't deserve to look any better because nobody was going to want to be with me anyway. So why even try to keep weight off or try to take care of myself? So it was something that I really, it's interesting because you're right. When I look in the mirror, I don't look like the typical burn survivor, but in my eyes, I still have that image of when I looked at myself for the first time in the hospital bed with the mirror, and I still see that. And it took a lot of work for me to move beyond that. I don't as much anymore. Looking in the mirror, that used to be, I remember my parents like taking mirrors out of the house, when I first had this accident happen so that I didn't have to look at it. And it used to be, I would avoid looking myself in the mirror. I tried to shave and do other things without really looking or looking, but teaching myself emotionally to kind of not think about my scars. I've come a long way with that. And so I don't think it affects me as much as it used to. But those were ways that was really hard. Part of this is too, I actually just got married less than 2 months ago. So that helps kind of mollify, hey, is anybody ever going to love me? And married a beautiful woman who's very accepting of my scars, both inside and out. And that helps, makes a big difference.
Congratulations
but those are just
on
those
that.
ways that it hurts. Yeah.
So let me just reintroduce you here. So I'm speaking with Samuel Moore-Sobel. His book is Can You See My Scars? So walk us through the decision to write this book and what you wanted to say.
Yeah, it's a good question. It was one of those things that I remember, again, just a few weeks after the accident, I was lying awake one night. I wasn't able to sleep. I was already having those bouts of insomnia and I was very uncomfortable. In those days, I had to have bacitracin, antibiotic, all over my face. So it was itchy as it was regrowing. I wasn't able to shave. So I just remember being just kept up all days and hours of the night because of that. I remember having a fan in front of me trying to relieve it because I just was so itchy. But they told me not to scratch. But I remember being up one night and just really kind of feeling sorry for myself, right? Sorry that this had happened. Just really trying to process this. What was I going to do now? And I remember just having the light bulb go off in my head. And it was probably midnight or 1 a.m. at this point, and just thinking, I'm going to write about this. I was in newspaper class at the time in high school, so I'd had a prevalent an interest in writing. But I just remember thinking, that's what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to take this story and share it with the world. And I didn't know how I was going to do that because I didn't have the words, right? I'd gone through this experience and I didn't know how to even express it. Like I have journals that I was writing during that time. And sometimes there's just literally, I just didn't even know how to describe how I felt. There was just no words for what it was. So I really had to spend a lot of time really working through those emotions and journaling that. And so it was a process that took more than a decade of really going back through, then I had all those journal entries and I had hundreds of thousands of words, but obviously not all of that is for public consumption. Not all of it has a cohesive narrative. And so I had to really make that, go through and edit and take each part and say, is this pertinent to the story? Is it not? And really tell a full story based on that. And it was a long and intensive process of really grappling with how to get the words. And then, I mean, the story kept evolving because I was still
Mm-hmm.
going in and out of surgery. My last surgery was just about 2 or 3 years ago. So I was still having surgeries. I was still feeling new things. And it just didn't feel quite complete. I would come to the end of the story and feel like, I feel like there's more chapters here. And so it kept getting added on and added on. And finally, coming to the place about a year ago of saying, okay, here we're done. The story's complete. Submitting to the publisher and then going through the whole publishing process, which again, then hitting this spring and finally getting it where it needed to be, and then COVID happens. And thinking, oh man, I took almost 11 years to get this done, and now we're in the middle of COVID. Do I go forward or not? And that was a whole other determination of, do I do this? Do I not? Do I delay? And having to figure out what to do there.
Well, I think one reading of the title, "Can You See My Scars," is, maybe you can't see them, but can you really see them? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. I think, it's kind of that double entendre, right? Of like, hey, can you see my scars? But then also there are scars that are maybe not visible for everyone to see, but they're still there. And one of the things I've learned through this journey, Guy, is that we all have scars, right? Whether they may not be as visible as mine once were, right? That they're really physical and you can see them on my face and that you can't ignore them. Especially in the days after the accident, but they may be emotional, right? We all incur scars as we go through life, no matter what happens, whether we go through a bad breakup or we have a parent die or any kind of adversity, right? And I think that the question isn't so much when are we going to have these scars? Is adversity going to arrive? The question more is, what are we going to do once it does, right? What are we going to do with these scars once we have them? I think everybody has them. And I think we have to make a choice. And I think there are some people who can choose to kind of wallow in that and wallow in self-pity. And we wouldn't blame them or judge them. We'd say, yeah, what happened to you is horrible. But there's also the other track of saying, hey, I'm going to share these scars with the world. And for me, the only redemptive aspect to this story is being able to share this story. Otherwise it's just this horrible accident that happened in the middle of nowhere with the glass jar of sulfuric acid exploding on my face and arms. Being able to share this story so that other people can say, hey, I'm reading your book and I identify with that. I've had readers who've come back and said, hey, I was reading through and I have symptoms of PTSD and depression. I didn't even know it. Or I can relate to those questions you're asking about identity. And that kind of ties into, okay, now I have the tools that I need to go forward and share my story with someone else. I think the only way any of us can achieve healing is through the sharing of stories. And I think the only way our scars can have that redemptive aspect is having the courage to do so. And it's hard. It's hard work to talk about the horrible things that happen to us, but I think there's such a redemptive aspect to it.
When you talk about identity now, where are you with that? What meaning have you made from this in a sense?
For me, and it was such a journey. I want to emphasize. I know some people, it's my journey in some ways is a happy ending, right? I wrote the book. I graduated high school on time. I went to college, graduated college. I married a beautiful woman, the love of my life. I wrote this book. It all kind of comes together, right? But that wasn't. It took almost 11 years. It's been more than 11 years since the accident. It took time to get there. Mm. So for me, I went through all those experiences, kind of that grieving process. I had to mourn the loss of my face. And it again, the appearance of it, but then also just the sense of losing kind of that, the childlike wonder that I'd had. I was 15, right? I wasn't a child, but I still had that kind of innocence, right? And and I lost that. I came to grips with this world where horrible things happen to people, no matter if they're in the wrong or not in the situation, right? It's just bad things happen to good people, and that's what happens. And I had to grapple with those questions. I had to grapple with, do I still believe in God after this? Do I, all those things. I had to question everything. And now, I embrace my scars. I'm proud of my scars. If you were to be able to wave a magic wand in front of me and say, hey, I can take them all away for you, I don't want that anymore. For a long time, I wanted that. I wanted to eradicate the scars on my face. And I'm okay with how I look now, more than okay. I embrace them because I see them as symbols of not only survival, but also of being able to come through and not only survive, but thrive and live a life that is meaningful and hits all the milestones, right, that we as a culture kind of ascribe to young adulthood and reaching those milestones, but also living a life that is deeply of meaning. And so for me, I'm no longer ashamed of that. I went through that. I went through stages where I would grow a beard to try to cover up And then I would, have those periods, and I don't do that anymore. I wear it proudly. I tell audiences now, it's ironic. 11 years ago, I would have loved to wear a mask, but now I don't want that. I want everybody to see it. So it's kind of like, it's almost like the pandemic happened 11 years too late, right? As horrible as that is, but it's like, man, I would have loved this 11 years ago, not having to show my scars, but now I'm proud of them. And I think they're symbols of healing, and I'm grateful for the life I have. And I'm grateful that I was able to survive this. And the last thing is, I can look back on this experience and I can say, hey, if I was able to make it through that, I can make it through whatever comes next. When you're 15, you don't have that life experience. So to me, this was a life-altering thing. I don't know if life's going to get better, but now, I'm almost 27. You can kind of look back and say, hey, I was able to make it through that, and I can move forward and do it again, whatever comes my way, no matter if it's harder or less, not as challenging as that experience was.
Wow. That is amazing. What inspires you? What do you grab on to continue to get strength and cultivate inspiration? What gets you going?
Yeah, that's it's one of those things where I'm a people person. I love being around people. So the pandemic's been especially hard for me because I want to be around people and talking to people out there doing that. But for me, like, I just draw inspiration from people and hearing other people's stories. I love following, there's a lot of other burn survivors that I follow on social media and have the chance to talk to. And I really draw strength from that. I'm a big supporter of the Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors. I love that organization. And I love reading their weekly or the quarterly magazine that comes out, and just drawn on the inspiration of stories of others. Because there are days, Guy, that I'm, that are hard. There's days that I don't know if I want to get on and do this again, right? I don't know if I want to move forward in this and share my story one more time. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's always so rewarding, because there's people who I hear from who say, hey, that really made me feel like I too can overcome. And that always inspires me to hear other people who can say, hey, because you made it through this terrible experience, I can handle whatever adversity comes my way. And that is always so inspirational. And so for me, just grabbing inspiration from those things, and obviously reading books and hearing other people's stories is just so impactful to me. I'm a big believer in sharing stories, because I think that feeling that relatability aspect of other people, that we're all human. Part of being human is going through suffering. And if we can identify the ways that other people overcame, it's so meaningful and can be a guide for the rest of us as we kind of make our way in this world. Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing an incredible job. I mean, I just am so inspired by listening to you and hearing you. And did you say you had children or not? You just got married, right?
I just got married.
You could have kids, but I think if you do go on to be a parent, you're going to be an incredible parent.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if you don't have a podcast, you should start a podcast. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Samuel?
That's a great question. The big thing is go to my website, www.samuel-sobel.com. And you can also find me on social media, on Twitter or on Instagram with @Moore_Sobel.
Okay, we'll have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So the book again is Can You See My Scars? We'll have that linked up also. Now, you mentioned some other people that you follow. Do you have any go-to book recommendations aside from your own, whether trauma related or not, or anything that you think, anything you're reading, or anything that you think would be inspiring and so forth?
Yeah, I'm always trying to read a new book. I just finished, actually, my wife and I, we tried, it was my very first one, Guy, on Audible. I'd never done that. I never, but she has an account. And so we listened to Educated by Tara Westover. And that is, I know everybody's talked about that book and it was a bestseller, but to me, that book was so impactful because it talks a little bit about, it's got a little bit of everything, right? It's talking about, her overcoming trauma and her worldview from coming from being a young adult or being a child growing up under her parents and kind of, you accept everything your parents say at face value, right? And her father was so impactful in her life and he was so domineering in some ways. And then to kind of come into teenage years and young adulthood and then going away to college and breaking out from that, from the experience of her family and then saying, wow, there's a whole wide world out there, and kind of questioning that. And I think so much of her story, even if we have people aren't acquainted with Mormonism or haven't grown up in that kind of culture. To me, it's so impactful. There's such a relatability aspect of going through that. We all, even if we have great parents, we all go through that process of kind of becoming more aware of what our parents are telling us and then kind of making our own decisions and staking our own identity. So that book I think is fantastic. And the way she kind of organically takes a hold of her story and comes to peace with her scars that were left because of her upbringing. That's always a go-to book. And then one of my favorites is James McBride. I think he's a fantastic writer, but I love all of his work. And he's always been somebody who's really impacted me. The Color of Water is a fantastic book. Just love the complexity and the nuance of his story and his interwoven with his mother's story. And again, just that coming of age and understanding your story in light of your parents is just really powerful to me. So those are two books that I love and would reread too if I have the time to go back and look at them again.
Awesome. All right, I'll have those linked up. Samuel, man, awesome having you on here. Love to have you back, and best wishes to you, my friend.
Thank you so much. You were such a great interviewer. I really appreciate your empathy and your kindness, and thank you so much for letting me tell my story. It's an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right. See you later.
Hey, everyone. I just want to let you know that I am super excited to announce coming January 2021, which is about, 3 weeks away, I'm going to be launching the Trauma Therapist newsletter. And this is a resource, an online monthly resource that will be delivered to your inbox and really geared towards therapists who are interested and passionate about learning about trauma. We'll include it in the newsletter. We'll be highlighting different modalities each month. So giving you the opportunity to compare and contrast different modalities and get informed. We'll be looking at different trauma programs in schools, see which ones are offering different certifications and so forth. I'll be talking with different trauma professionals, both seasoned and newer clinicians. We'll be highlighting different books, favorites of mine, and also ones that the Trauma Therapist 2.0 community are reading and recommending. We'll be listing different online conferences and events and summits, really a jam-packed resource to keep you up to date, informed, and inspired, which I love to do. So if you're interested, head on over to the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. You can jump on board right now and get a discount before it goes live January of 2021. Once again, the traumatherapistnewsletter.com, and I hope to see you there. All right, take care.